2 weeks after I buried the love of my life, my own son called to teach me a lesson about grief. It was not the lesson I was expecting. I always believed that sorrow was a private island, a place where you retreated to heal. I thought my children, Jamal and Simone, would be the ones to build a bridge to help me back to the mainland. Instead, they arrived with blueprints and a bulldozer, ready to demolish the only world I had left. The house was so quiet without Robert. For 40 years, his presence had filled every room. His low chuckle during the evening news, the smell of his coffee brewing at dawn, the sound of his keys dropping into the ceramic bowl by the door. Now the silence was a physical weight. I was sitting in the kitchen staring at a cup of tea that had long gone cold. Outside the window, the garden we had cultivated together for decades was bathed in the soft morning light of Atlanta. The roses were still blooming. It felt like a betrayal. How could anything still be beautiful when my world had ended? That's when the phone rang. Its shrill sound tearing through the quiet. It was Jamal. I answered, my voice still raspy from disuse. "Hello. Mom, we need to talk about the house." There was no warmth in his greeting. No, "How are you holding up?" No, "I was just thinking about you." His tone was brisk, efficient, the voice he used for business calls. He was a successful man, my son. He knew how to close a deal. I just never imagined I would be on the other side of his negotiation table. I took a slow breath, trying to find my footing. "Good morning to you too, Jamal." "Don't start, Mom," he said, his impatience evident. "Simone and I have been talking. This place is too big for you alone. The taxes, the upkeep, it is just not realistic." Each word was a carefully placed stone building a wall between us. I looked around my kitchen at the faint pencil marks on the doorframe where we had measured his height as a boy. This house was not a collection of rooms and bills to me. It was a library of our lives, and he was talking about it as if it were a meaningless asset to be liquidated. I did not know what to say, so I said nothing. My silence seemed to irritate him further. He sighed, a sound heavy with manufactured concern. "Look, we have already found a buyer, a family with young kids. They made a very generous offer. It would be enough for you to get a nice little condo somewhere, something more manageable." And there it was, the bulldozer. He had not come to build a bridge. He had come to clear the land. My land. The shock of it was so cold, so sharp, it momentarily eclipsed my grief. They had already found a buyer. My husband's funeral flowers had barely wilted on his grave. A strange calm settled over me. It was Robert's calm, the quiet strength he always had when facing a problem. I thought of his last words to me in the hospital, his hand warm in mine. "You are stronger than you think, Amani." I finally spoke, and my voice was as steady as a rock. "The house has no mortgage, Jamal." The line went quiet, a thick, stunned silence. He had assumed. They had both assumed. And for years I had let them. The call ended a few moments later with mumbled excuses and a promise to talk soon. I hung up the phone, but the silence in the house was different now. It was no longer empty. It was filled with a cold, clear understanding. My grieving was over. A battle had just begun. After my call with Jamal, an uneasy quiet settled over the house for a few days. But it was the calm before the storm, not the peace I longed for. The phone calls started again, this time more frequent, a coordinated effort. If it was not Jamal with his blunt demands, it was Simone with her carefully crafted sweetness, a spoonful of sugar meant to hide the poison underneath. She called that Friday afternoon. Her voice was syrupy, dripping with false sympathy. "Mama, I was just calling to check on you. You have been on my mind all day." I knew it was a lie, but a part of me, the part that was still just a mother, wanted to believe it. "I am managing baby," I told her, my voice quiet. "I know it must be so hard," she cooed. "That big empty house, all those memories. That is why Jamal and I are so worried. We think we have the perfect solution." She painted a beautiful picture, one of a loving daughter caring for her widowed mother. She spoke of selling the house as a liberation for me, a way to be free from the burdens of ownership. "You could have a nice nest egg, Mama," she explained. "We found this perfect little condo over in Sandy Springs. It is small, easy to clean. You would be so much happier." Her words were like silk wrapping around me, trying to suffocate me gently. I stayed silent, listening to her spin her web. I did not want a nice little condo. I wanted my home. I wanted the azalea bushes Robert planted for our 10th anniversary. I wanted the chipped countertop where he spilled a bottle of red wine and we laughed for an hour. My hesitation seemed to be her cue to reveal the true depth of their plan. Or even better, she added, her voice bright with fake excitement, you could just move in with us. We could renovate the basement. It would be so cozy. You would have your own little space and you would not be alone. We could take care of you. There it was, the final brutal truth. My daughter, my sweet Simone, was offering me a life in her basement. I was not a mother to be cherished, but a problem to be managed, an old piece of furniture to be stored away in a dark corner. The shock of her words was a physical blow. They were not worried about me, they were worried about their inheritance. The house was not a home to them, it was just an asset, a payday. The silk wrapping fell away, and I saw the cold, hard greed beneath. The mother in me finally went silent, and the woman who had built a life with Robert Washington found her voice. No, I said. The word was quiet, but it was absolute. Mama, just think about it. No, Simone. The answer is no. This conversation is over. I ended the call before she could say another word. I stood in the kitchen, my hands still on the phone, trembling not with weakness, but with a terrible, clarifying rage. I was alone. They had surrounded me not with love, but with demands. I was besieged in my own home, and I knew then that I could not just wait for their next attack. I had to find a way to fight back. The weekend passed in a blur of sorrow and a simmering, unfamiliar anger. To keep my hands and mind from spiraling, I finally decided to do what I had been avoiding for 2 agonizing weeks. I went into Robert's office. Pushing the door open felt like breaking a sacred seal. The air inside was still thick with his presence. It was exactly as he had left it. His reading glasses were perched on a stack of books about the Civil War, their lenses dusty. A half-finished crossword puzzle sat on his desk, his elegant handwriting filling some of the squares. It felt like an archaeological site, a time capsule of a life abruptly paused, and I was an intruder. I started with the bookshelves, a floor-to-ceiling monument to his curious mind. I ran my fingers over the spines, dusting each volume, my touch lingering on his favorites. It was a silent conversation, a way of speaking to him, of feeling close to him one last time, through the things he had loved. I spent hours in there, organizing papers that did not need organizing, filing old receipts into boxes, losing myself in the quiet, methodical rhythm of the work. It was a way to impose order on a world that felt utterly chaotic. The sun was beginning its slow descent, casting long golden shadows across the room, when I knelt down to vacuum the large Persian rug beneath his heavy oak desk. It was a task of pure muscle memory. As my hand brushed against the carpet near the back wall where the desk met the floor, I felt it. A slight looseness, a faint, almost imperceptible outline of a square that was not there before. My heart, which had felt so heavy and slow all day, began to beat a little faster. Robert was a meticulous man, a creature of habit and precision, but he was not a carpenter. I pushed the vacuum aside and knelt on the floor, my fingers exploring the edge of the rug. I pulled it back, the thick wool heavy in my hands, and then I saw it. My breath caught in my throat. There, cut with perfect neatness into the dark hardwood floorboards, was a hidden compartment, and nestled inside it, shining in the dim, dusty light, was a handsome, dark blue leather briefcase. I had never seen it before in all my 40 years of marriage. A cold wave of hesitation washed over me. This was a secret he had kept from everyone, even from me. Was it my place to open it? For one sharp, painful moment, I felt like an intruder all over again, violating a private part of the man I loved more than life itself. But then a stronger feeling, a powerful, unshakable intuition rose to the surface. This was not a secret he was keeping from me. It was a secret he was keeping for me. This was not a betrayal. It was a message sent from across the veil. With a resolve I did not know I possessed, I lifted the briefcase out. It was heavy, solid, and it smelled faintly of his cologne and old, distinguished paper. It was locked with a 3-digit combination dial, the brass tumblers gleaming as if they were new. My mind raced. What numbers would he have chosen? He was not a man for random digits. Everything he did had meaning, a quiet logic that I had always admired. I closed my eyes and pictured his face, his warm smile, the way he would tap his fingers on the table when he was deep in thought. Of course, it had to be the numbers that had defined our entire life together. Our anniversary. June 12th. My fingers, clumsy with anticipation, trembled as I turned the dials. 6, 1, 2. There was a soft, satisfying click as the lock disengaged. I held my breath and slowly, reverently lifted the lid. The interior was not filled with old photographs or sentimental keepsakes as I might have imagined. Instead, it was filled with carefully organized manila folders, each one neatly labeled in his familiar, steady handwriting. It was the briefcase of an accountant, a man of logic and order, even in his secrets. But resting on the very top, stark against the plain folders, was a thick, cream-colored envelope with a single word written on the front in bold black ink. Imani, my name. My hands shook as I picked it up. The paper was heavy, expensive. It felt as if he were in the room with me, his hand on my shoulder, his voice a low, reassuring whisper in my ear, telling me it was okay. This was it. This was his final gift, his last message. I sank down into his worn leather chair, the one that still held the faint shape of his body, and I clutched the letter to my chest for a long moment, gathering my strength. Whatever was inside this briefcase, whatever was written in this letter, I knew in my soul that it would change everything. I sat there in the deepening twilight of Robert's office, the heavy envelope feeling both fragile and monumental in my hands. My fingers traced the letters of my own name written in his strong, familiar script. For a moment, a long, suspended moment, I could not bring myself to open it. It felt too final, like closing the last page of the last book we would ever read together. But I knew this was not an ending. Robert had left this for me as a beginning, a map for a journey I now had to take alone. With a deep breath that shuddered through my whole body, I carefully broke the seal. The letter inside was several pages long, filled with his beautiful, precise handwriting that had always calmed me. It began with words that felt like a warm embrace from the past, words that tore open the fresh wound of my grief all over again. My dearest Imani, it started. If you are reading this, then I am gone, and my greatest regret is leaving you to face the world alone. 40 years was not enough. 1,000 years would not have been enough. Please know that every day I had with you was the greatest gift of my life. You were my dawn and my dusk, my quiet harbor in every storm. Tears welled in my eyes, hot and fast, blurring the ink. I paused, wiping them away with the back of my hand, forcing myself to continue. After the first paragraph of love and loss, the tone of the letter shifted, becoming serious, laced with a sadness that I now understood completely. I am writing this because I have to speak a hard truth, my love, he wrote. A truth I wish I did not have to acknowledge. I love our children, Imani. I love Jamal and Simone with all my heart. But I am not blind to their flaws that I fear I may have had a hand in creating. I have watched them grow into adults who see our life's work not as a legacy of love, but as an asset waiting to be claimed. They see our home, our savings, everything we have built with our own hands as their right, not as our security. I fear that when I am gone, they will circle you not with comfort, but with expectations. They will try to make you feel small, old, and incapable so that they can take control of what we have built. Every word was a validation, a painful echo of the cold dread I had been feeling for days. He had seen it. He had known long before I was willing to admit it to myself. He was not just my husband. He was my guardian, my protector, even from beyond the grave. He understood the nuances of their character in a way I and my motherly love had often chosen to ignore. The letter then guided me through the contents of the briefcase, his final act of meticulous, loving protection. "But I have not left you defenseless, my love," he wrote. "You are the strongest woman I have ever known. I have simply made sure you have the tools you need. Look in the first folder." My hands, now steady with a dawning sense of purpose, reached into the briefcase. I pulled out the folder labeled Deed of House. Inside was the official title to our home, and stapled to it, signed and notarized 5 years prior, was a quitclaim deed. He had legally and irrevocably removed his name from the ownership of the property, leaving it solely and indisputably in mine. The house was mine. Not ours, mine. A fortress with walls they could not breach. The first heavy piece of armor settled onto my shoulders. "Next," the letter continued, his words guiding me, "look at the bank statements." I opened the second folder. It was thick with statements from a high-yield savings account at a bank I did not even recognize. An account in my name only. For the past 10 years, Robert, my meticulous, forward-thinking accountant husband, had been quietly diverting a portion of his pension and Social Security into this secret fund. The balance was staggering, a number I had to read twice to believe. It was more than enough. Enough for me to live with dignity, to travel to fix the roof, without worry, to never have to ask my children for a single penny for the rest of my days. The breastplate, solid and secure, clicked into place. Finally, he directed me to the last document. "This is for the unexpected," he wrote, "for your absolute peace of mind." It was a life insurance policy. Not a massive one, but a significant private policy he had taken out years ago, separate from his work. The sole beneficiary, listed in clear, undeniable block print, was Imani Washington. No mention of Jamal, no mention of Simone. It was his last gift, a final shield to protect me from any storm they might create. I let the documents fall into my lap, the paper rustling in the silent room. The full weight of what he had done washed over me. This was not about money. This was about love. A fierce, intelligent, and profoundly protective love. He had seen the future, and he had armed me for it. He had spent years quietly forging a suit of armor for me piece by piece, anticipating a battle he knew he would not be here to help me fight. The tears that came now were not tears of grief. They were tears of overwhelming, heartbreaking gratitude. I was not a poor widow. I was not a helpless old woman to be shuffled off into a basement. I was the wife of Robert Washington, and he had made sure the whole world would know it. I picked up his letter, my warrior queen, and read the final lines. They were not a suggestion. They were a call to arms. I sat in Robert's leather chair. The shield and armor of his foresight settled around me. For a few minutes I just breathed, letting the reality of my new situation sink in. I was safe. I was secure. I had the power. I thought I had reached the end of his letter, the end of his final message to me. But as I ran my thumb over the crisp edge of the last page, I saw there was more written on the back. His handwriting was slightly different here, as if he had added this part later, after much thought. It was titled with 2 simple words, Plan B. My brow furrowed. What more could there be? He had already given me a fortress. He had given me a sword and shield. The letter began again, his voice now softer, more intimate, speaking to the deepest parts of my heart. My love, he wrote, I have given you the means to defend our home. It is yours, and no one can take it from you. You can stay there for the rest of your days, and that is your right. But I know you, Imani. I know your heart, and I fear the cost of the battle that lies ahead. A legal fight, even one you are certain to win, will be ugly. It will drain your spirit. It will force you to see the very worst in our children, day after day. It will turn our home, our sanctuary, into a bitter battlefield, and I cannot bear the thought of that. He was right. The thought of depositions of lawyers, of seeing my own children in a courtroom, made my stomach turn. It would be a victory, but a hollow one won at the cost of my own peace. That is why I created an alternative, the letter went on. A path to peace, not just victory. Years ago, after my parents passed, I used the entirety of my inheritance money that was mine alone to prepare an escape for you. It is a place just for you, a sanctuary where no one can touch you. In the folder marked Amelia Island Trust, you will find the documents. My eyes widened. I reached back into the briefcase, my fingers searching for the folder. There it was. Inside was a deed not to a house, but to a beautiful condominium on the coast of Florida overlooking the ocean. It was purchased and held in an irrevocable trust, a legal entity that could not be challenged with me, Imani Washington, as the sole beneficiary. There was even a small portfolio of photographs inside, a bright, airy living room with a balcony facing the sea, a kitchen filled with sunlight, a quiet beach just steps away. It was a dream I never even knew I had. He had thought of everything. The trust was funded with enough money to cover taxes and fees for the rest of my life. He had even included the contact information for an old friend, Sophia, who lived in the same building and had been quietly checking on the property for him once a month. I looked back at the letter, my vision swimming. His final words were the ones that would change the course of my life forever. "That is where you can start again, Imani," he wrote, and I could almost hear his gentle voice in the quiet room. "A place where you can find peace, where you can walk on the beach and read your books and be free from all of this. Do not let them turn our home into a battlefield. Our true legacy is not the bricks and mortar we lived in. Our legacy is the love we shared and the peace you deserve to have now. The choice is yours. Stay and fight for the castle, or retreat to the island and win the war for your soul. Whatever you choose, know that I am with you." The letter ended there. I slowly, carefully folded the pages and placed them back in the envelope. The choice. He had given me a choice. For the past few weeks, I had felt trapped, cornered, a victim of my children's greed. But now, the walls of the room seemed to expand. The world opened up. I could stay here in this house filled with ghosts and memories and fight. I could spend my final years in a bitter struggle, proving a point, winning a victory that would leave me exhausted and heartbroken. Or I could leave. I could take the peace he was offering me. I could honor his true legacy, the legacy of love, by choosing a life of tranquility over a life of conflict. The rage that had been a fire in my belly for days finally subsided, replaced by a cool, clear wave of absolute certainty. The fight was never about the house. It was about my dignity, and I did not need to stay here to keep it. Robert had already ensured I would have it wherever I went. My grief for him was still a vast ocean inside me, but now for the first time I could see a distant shore, a sunny shore. I was not a victim anymore. I was not a pawn in my children's game. I was the keeper of Robert's legacy, the executor of his final brilliant plan. I stood up from his chair, no longer stooped with the weight of sorrow, but standing tall with purpose. The battle was over before it had even begun, and I had already won. I slept that night for the first time in weeks. It was a deep, dreamless sleep, the kind that truly rests the soul. When I woke the next morning, the sun was streaming through my bedroom window, and the heavy shroud of grief had lifted, replaced by a quiet, unshakable sense of purpose. I was no longer just a widow mourning her husband. I was the guardian of his legacy, the soldier chosen to execute his final brilliant campaign. And today, the campaign would begin. I did not reach for my usual housecoat. Instead, I opened my closet and chose my best suit, a tailored navy blue outfit that Robert had always said made me look like a queen. I put on my pearls and a pair of sensible heels. This was not about vanity. This was armor. I was not dressing for a day of errands. I was dressing for battle, and I intended to look the part of the victor. As I drove through the familiar Atlanta streets towards downtown, the world looked different. The oak trees lining the avenues seemed to stand taller. The familiar storefronts seemed brighter. It was the same world, but I was seeing it through new eyes, the eyes of a woman who had been given a second chance at her own life. I was not running from a home filled with sorrow. I was driving towards a future secured by love. My destination was the law office of Henderson Black and Associates. Marcus Henderson had been Robert's friend and lawyer for over 30 years. His office was in an old, stately brick building, the kind that smelled of old books, lemon polish, and the quiet dignity of the law. When I walked in, his receptionist greeted me with a warm, sympathetic smile. But when I was shown into his office, I did not present myself as a grieving widow seeking a shoulder to cry on. I sat down opposite his large mahogany desk, placed the blue leather briefcase beside my chair, and met his gaze with a calm resolve. Marcus. I began, my voice clear and steady. Thank you for seeing me on such short notice. I am here because I need your help. It concerns Robert's estate and the children. He listened patiently, his kind wrinkled face a mask of professional concern as I laid out the entire story. I told him about the phone calls from Jamal and Simone, their relentless pressure to sell the house, Simone's chilling offer of a life for me in her basement. His expression grew more somber with every word. When I finished, he shook his head slowly. Imani, I am so sorry you are having to go through this at such a time, he said, his voice full of genuine empathy. I appreciate that, Marcus, I replied. But I did not come here for sympathy. I came here for counsel. Robert, it seems, anticipated this. He left me instructions.
땀이지 마.
Asa. It was then that I lifted the briefcase onto his desk. I opened it, and one by one laid out the documents on the polished wood between us. The quitclaim deed to the house, the statements from the secret savings account, the private life insurance policy, and finally the file for the Amelia Island Trust. As Marcus Henderson examined each document, his demeanor shifted entirely. The look of sympathy was replaced by one of silent, profound awe. He picked up the deed, his trained eyes scanning the legal language. He let out a low whistle. He looked at the bank statements, his eyebrows rising higher with each page. He read through the trust documents, nodding slowly, a small smile playing on his lips. When he was finished, he leaned back in his chair and looked at me, his eyes shining with a mixture of respect and deep affection for his old friend. My goodness, Imani, he said, his voice quiet with admiration. Robert, that magnificent, stubborn man. He was always 3 steps ahead of everyone. This is not just an estate plan. This is a masterpiece. Everything here is legally airtight. The house is yours free and clear. The trust is irrevocable. The money is untouchable. They cannot lay a finger on any of it. A wave of relief so powerful it almost made me dizzy washed over me. Hearing it confirmed by a legal professional made it real solid, undeniable. He built you a fortress, Imani, Marcus continued, and he left you the keys to a kingdom besides. He did, I said, my voice thick with emotion. And now I need you to help me defend it. I do not want to fight Marcus, but I will not be bullied. He leaned forward, his hands flat on the desk. The sympathy was gone, replaced by the sharp focus of a seasoned lawyer. You will not have to fight, Imani. We are going to end this before it begins. Robert has given us all the ammunition we need. We will draft the letters today. We will secure everything. They will not know what hit them. For the first time since Robert's death, I felt the ground firm beneath my feet. I was no longer alone in this. I had an ally. A powerful, intelligent ally who had known and respected my husband. We spent the next hour mapping out the strategy, a clear, decisive plan of action. As I left his office and stepped back out into the bright Georgia sunshine, I felt 10 feet tall. The war was not coming. The war was already over. I left Mr. Henderson's office feeling like a different woman than the one who had entered. The plan we had created was not one of anger or revenge. It was a plan of quiet, decisive action, a series of moves designed to build an impenetrable wall around me and the life Robert had secured for me. We did not waste a single moment. By the time I arrived back home, Mr. Henderson had already fired the first shot in our silent war. He called to inform me that a formal cease and desist letter had been sent by courier to the real estate agency Jamal and Simone had hired. The letter was polite, professional, and utterly ruthless. It informed them that they were attempting to market a property without the owner's consent, that their client, my son, had no legal authority to sell, and that any further contact with me or any attempt to list or show my home would result in immediate legal action against both the agency and the agent personally. It was a clean surgical strike, cutting off their primary line of attack before they even knew what was happening. While Mr. Henderson handled the external threat, my job was to secure my own internal borders. The next morning, I drove to the bank, not with the heavy heart of a widow, but with the steady resolve of a general securing her supply lines. I walked past the friendly tellers who knew my name and went straight to the manager's office. There, I systematically began to dismantle the financial ties that had become chains. First, I closed the small joint savings account I shared with Simone. We had opened it years ago, a just-in-case fund for family emergencies. It had felt like a bond of trust at the time. Now I saw it for what it was, a doorway into my life I could no longer leave open. The process was simple, a few signatures on a form, but the feeling was profound. It was the sound of a gate clanging shut. Next, I addressed the accounts Robert had secretly created for me. Following the instructions he had left, I activated my full access, created new passwords, and requested new debit cards. I transferred the funds from my old vulnerable accounts into these new, fortified ones. With each transaction, I felt another layer of Robert's protection settling around me. It was as if his hand were guiding mine, showing me how to be the queen in my own castle. My final stop of the day was a phone call to my financial planner. I explained calmly that due to recent family developments, I needed to make significant revisions to my will and testament. I instructed him to restructure my estate. The house, the savings, the investments, all of it was to be placed in a trust. Upon my passing, a generous portion would be set aside for my granddaughter Maya's education, ensuring her future was secure. The remainder would be split between my favorite charities and my sister. As for Jamal and Simone, I did not cut them out completely. That felt too much like their own brand of cruelty. Instead, I left them each a token amount, a sum just large enough to serve as a clear and final statement. It was a message that their actions had consequences and that the Bank of Mom was now permanently closed. The results of our counter-offensive were immediate. The real estate agent called Jamal in a panic, officially dropping him as a client and wanting nothing to do with this situation. And then, as expected, the calls to my phone began. First Jamal, his voice a furious bark. "What have you done?" he yelled without any preamble. "You sent a lawyer after our realtor. Are you trying to embarrass us?" I held the phone slightly away from my ear, my heart beating calmly. The woman who would have cried a week ago was gone. "Jamal," I said, my voice even and cool, "this is now a legal matter. I will not be discussing it with you." "A legal matter? You are making this a legal matter. We are your family," he shouted, his voice cracking with disbelief. "That is correct," I replied. "And because of that, any and all future inquiries you have regarding my property or my finances should be directed to my lawyer, Mr. Marcus Henderson. He has all the information you need. Have a good day." I hung up before he could respond. Not 30 seconds later, my phone rang again. It was Simone, her voice a high-pitched wail of accusation. "Mama, how could you? I cannot believe you would do this to us." The performance was almost convincing, but I could hear the hard edge of greed beneath the fake tears. I repeated the same calm, unshakable phrase. "Simone, please direct all your questions to Mr. Henderson. His number is in the directory. I will not be discussing this further." I ended the call, and then for the first time in my life, I blocked both of their numbers. A profound silence filled my kitchen. It was not the silence of loneliness or grief. It was the silence of control, the silence of peace. The first phase of my plan was complete. The fortress was secure. The peace I had earned was short-lived. I knew it would be. A cornered animal is a dangerous one, and I had cornered both of my children. 2 days after I blocked their numbers, they appeared on my doorstep. I heard Jamal's expensive sedan roar up the driveway, the car doors slamming with a synchronized anger. The doorbell chimed not once but 3 times in rapid succession, an impatient, demanding sound that had no place in this quiet home. I was ready for them. Before I opened the door, I took my phone from my pocket, opened the voice recorder app, and pressed the red button to begin. I placed the phone screen down on the small table in the entryway, partially hidden by a vase of flowers. Then, with a slow, steadying breath, I opened the door. They stood there on my porch, a united front of indignation. Jamal's face was a tight knot of fury, his jaw clenched. Simone stood beside him, her arms crossed, her expression a practiced mask of wounded disappointment. They pushed past me into the living room without an invitation, as if they still owned the space. "What do you think you are doing?" Jamal started immediately, his voice booming in the quiet room where he had once played with toy soldiers. "Are you trying to destroy this family?" Simone chimed in, her voice dripping with venomous sweetness. "We are worried sick, Mama. First the lawyer, and now you will not answer our calls. We thought something had happened to you. We came here out of love." "You came here because your access to my money was denied," I replied, my voice devoid of emotion. I sat down in my favorite armchair, the one Robert always used to sit in, and folded my hands in my lap. I would not let them see me tremble. My calmness seemed to enrage them even more. They began to pace the room, their accusations flying like poisoned darts. I was selfish. I was hiding money from them. I was disrespecting their father's memory by not providing for them. They twisted every memory of love and support I had ever given them into a transaction, an obligation I was now failing to meet. I listened in silence. I watched the children I had raised, the children I had rocked to sleep and nursed through fevers, reveal the strangers they had become. Their words hurt, but they no longer had the power to break me. Each accusation was simply another confirmation that I was doing the right thing. Finally, when their shouting and pleading had failed to produce the tears or the surrender they expected, Jamal played his final desperate card. He stopped pacing and stood directly in front of me, his shadow falling over me. "You know what?" he said, his voice low and dangerous. "I see what is happening. You are not thinking clearly. You are old. You are alone. And you are not capable of managing all of this by yourself. Dad knew it, and so do we." I looked up at him, my heart turning to ice. He leaned in closer, his voice dropping to a conspiratorial whisper. "So this is what is going to happen. If you do not cooperate, if you do not agree to sell the house and let us manage your finances, we will have no choice. We will take you to court. We will file for a conservatorship. We will prove to a judge that you are no longer mentally competent to make your own decisions. We will take control for your own good. Do you understand me, Mother?" The threat hung in the air between us, ugly and absolute. It was the ultimate betrayal. Not just an attack on my finances, but an attack on my mind, my freedom, my very identity as a person. I held his gaze for a long moment. Then slowly, deliberately, I reached over to the small table in the entryway. I picked up my phone, my thumb swiping across the screen and pressing the button to stop the recording. I held the phone up for him to see. "Thank you, Jamal," I said, and my voice was perfectly calm. "I think my lawyer, Mr. Henderson, will find that recording to be very, very interesting." The transformation was instantaneous and devastating. The color drained from Jamal's face. His arrogant posture collapsed, his shoulders slumping as if the air had been let out of him. Beside him, Simone let out a small, horrified gasp, her hand flying to her mouth. The anger, the entitlement, the righteous fury, all of it evaporated in a single silent moment of sheer, unadulterated panic. They knew what they had done. They knew what they had said. And now they knew that I had it all. They had not just threatened their grieving mother. They had threatened a woman who was prepared for them, and they had just handed her the perfect weapon to ensure they could never hurt her again. They had lost, and they knew it. After they left, a silence descended upon the house that was heavier than any I had ever known. The victory felt hollow, the taste of it like ash in my mouth. I had won the battle, but in doing so I had lost my children. Perhaps I had lost them long ago, and had only just now been forced to admit it. The recording on my phone was a weapon I could use, a shield to protect myself, but it could not mend what was broken. And I knew with a certainty that settled deep in my bones that our relationship, the one I had nurtured for over 40 years, was now beyond repair. There could be no going back. There was only moving forward. And to do that, I realized there was one final task I needed to perform. It was not an act of anger, but an act of profound and painful closure. That Saturday, I climbed the creaky wooden stairs to the attic. The air up there was thick with the scent of old paper cedar wood and dust. It was the museum of our family's history, and for decades I had been its soul-loving curator. But my job was now over. I spent the entire weekend among the ghosts of their childhoods. I found two large, sturdy boxes and labeled one Jamal and the other Simone. Then I began to sort through the carefully preserved artifacts of their pasts. For Jamal, I packed his first baseball glove, the leather still stiff, and remembered the afternoon Robert taught him how to catch in the backyard. I found his box of meticulously organized comic books, his collection of model airplanes, and the blue ribbon he won at the 4th grade science fair. Each item was a memory of the bright, curious boy he had once been, a boy who seemed to have vanished, completely replaced by a man consumed by bitterness and entitlement. For Simone, I packed the delicate pink ballet slippers she wore for her first recital. I found her collection of glass horse figurines, each one with a name she had given it. I packed her high school yearbooks, the pages filled with joyful, optimistic messages from her friends. I even found her childhood diary, a small pink book with a tiny brass lock, a secret world I had never tried to enter. I held it in my hand for a long time, wondering where that hopeful girl had gone. With each item I placed in the boxes, I was performing a quiet ceremony of release. I was not just packing away old toys and trophies. I was packing away the role I had played for so long. I was the keeper of their memories, the guardian of their past. I had held on to these things because I thought one day we would all look at them together and laugh and remember the love that had built our family. But that day would never come. To them, this house was an asset. To me, it was a home. And the contents of this attic were not treasures to them, but simply old junk standing in the way of their inheritance. By holding on to their past, I was preventing myself from moving into my own future. I was still their mother in a way they no longer deserved. When the boxes were full, I wrote 2 short, identical notes on plain white cardstock. The words were simple, formal, and final. "These things belong to you," I wrote. "I am returning them. I wish you all the best." I did not sign it Mama or Love Mom. I simply signed my name, Imani Washington. I placed 1 note in each box and sealed them shut with heavy packing tape. The sound of the tape stretching across the cardboard felt definitive, like a door closing for the last time. On Monday morning, I called a courier service. I did not want to deliver them myself. This was not a moment for another confrontation. This was a final, clean severance. The young man who arrived was polite and efficient. He lifted the 2 heavy boxes, the entire recorded history of my children's youth, and carried them out of my house. I watched from the living room window as he loaded them into his truck. I watched as the truck pulled away from the curb, turned the corner, and disappeared from view. I did not cry. The tears for the children I had lost had already been shed. Instead, I felt a profound, quiet sense of release. I had returned their past to them. It was now their burden to carry or to discard as they saw fit. My hands, my heart, and my home were finally blessedly empty. I had made space, not just in my attic, but in my life. I had made space for myself. The days that followed were quiet. The phone did not ring. No angry cars pulled into my driveway. It was an unnerving silence, the kind that follows a storm where the world seems to be holding its breath. I used that time not to wait for their next move, but to prepare for my own. I did not tell a soul what I was planning. This was my journey, a path paved for me by my husband, and I would walk it alone. 3 days after the courier truck had driven away with the ghosts of my children's past, I booked a one-way flight to Jacksonville, Florida. The night before I left, I walked through the house one last time. It was spotless. I had spent the day cleaning and polishing, not as a chore, but as a final act of love and respect for the home that had sheltered my family for 40 years. I ran my hand along the cool, smooth wood of the dining table where we had shared thousands of meals. I touched the worn fabric of Robert's armchair. I stood in the doorway of my children's old rooms, now clean and empty guest rooms, and felt a final, fleeting pang of sadness for the family we had once been. But it was a sadness without bitterness, a quiet acknowledgement of a chapter that was now finally over. My packing was simple and deliberate. I took only 1 large suitcase. Into it, I folded my favorite clothes, the comfortable things I would need for a life of sunshine and sea breezes. I packed the photograph of Robert and me on our wedding day, his smile so young and full of hope. I packed my grandmother's favorite cookbook. And that was all. Everything else was just stuff, and I was done with the weight of stuff. By my side, ready to be carried onto the plane, was the dark blue leather briefcase. It held my past, my present, and my future. It was all I needed. The next morning, a taxi came for me before the sun was fully up. I locked the front door of my house for the last time and did not look back. At the airport, I moved through the crowds like a ghost, an anonymous woman on her way to somewhere new. There was a lightness in my step I had not felt in years. As I sat at the gate, waiting for my flight to board, I felt a strange sense of peace. I was not running away from my life. I was running towards it. Once I was settled in my window seat on the plane, I felt the last knot of tension in my shoulders finally release. The engines began to hum a deep, powerful sound that felt like the beginning of a new song. As the plane taxied down the runway and then lifted into the air, I watched the familiar landscape of Atlanta shrink below me until it was nothing more than a patchwork quilt of greens and grays. I was leaving. I was really, truly leaving. Just as we broke through the clouds into the brilliant, unending sunshine, my phone, which I had forgotten to turn off, buzzed in my purse. And then it buzzed again and again and again. I pulled it out. The screen was filled with a string of frantic text messages. It was Jamal then, Simone, then Jamal again. "Mom, what are these boxes? What is all this stuff? Is this some kind of joke? What is going on? Simone said you sent her one too. Where are you? You have to call me right now." "Mama, please answer the phone. I am scared." I read their words, a chaotic jumble of confusion, anger, and for the first time a hint of genuine fear. They had received their pasts in the mail, and they did not know what to do with them. They did not understand. They thought this was another move in our game, another tactic in a war they did not realize was already over. A small, gentle smile touched my lips. I did not feel anger. I did not feel triumph. I just felt a quiet sense of pity and a profound, overwhelming sense of peace. Slowly, deliberately, I pressed the power button on the side of the phone. I held it down until the screen went dark. Then I slipped the silent, lifeless phone back into my purse. I turned my head and looked out the window. Below me, a vast, brilliant white sea of clouds stretched all the way to the horizon. Above me, the sky was a perfect, cloudless blue. Robert was right. My legacy was not bricks and mortar. It was this quiet, this light, this peace. I was free. The taxi from the Jacksonville airport drove over a bridge, and suddenly the air changed. It grew softer, warmer, and carried the unmistakable salty tang of the ocean. I rolled down the window and let the breeze wash over me, a gentle baptism into my new life. The address Robert had left led to a beautiful sun-bleached building complex, painted the color of soft sand with balconies that looked out over the endless blue of the Atlantic. As I paid the driver, a woman with a warm smile and eyes the color of sea glass came out to greet me. She had silver hair tied back in a cheerful scarf. It was Sophia, a dear friend from a lifetime ago, a friend Robert and I had lost touch with after she moved away. "Imani," she said, her voice full of warmth as she wrapped me in a hug. "He told me you would come one day. He made me promise I would be here for you." She led me up to the third floor to a corner unit and unlocked the door. The moment I stepped inside, I knew I was home. The apartment was filled with light. A gentle sea breeze drifted through the open balcony doors, carrying the sound of distant waves. The furniture was simple, comfortable, and elegant, exactly to my taste. On the bookshelf, next to a collection of classic novels, was a framed picture of Robert and me laughing on a beach vacation we had taken 20 years ago. He had prepared this place for me piece by piece, infusing it with his love. It was not a condo. It was a sanctuary. My new life began that day. The frantic, anxious rhythm of my old life in Atlanta faded away, replaced by the steady, soothing rhythm of the tides. My days took on a beautiful new shape, one that I designed for myself. I started each morning with a long walk on the beach, my bare feet in the cool sand, watching the sunrise paint the sky in shades of pink and orange. I would come home, make a cup of tea, and sit on my balcony to read. Sophia introduced me to her friends, a vibrant group of women who welcomed me without question. I joined their local book club, and for the first time in years, I felt the spark of my old passion for literature return. As a retired librarian, discussing stories with other people who loved them was like coming home to myself. I even bought a new journal and began to write again. Not about my grief or my anger, but about the sea, the sky, and the quiet joy of a life lived in peace. I was no longer a character in someone else's drama. I was finally writing my own story. I did not cut myself off from family entirely. Every Sunday afternoon, I would have a video call with my granddaughter Maya. I did not speak of the conflict with her parents. That was their story to tell, their burden to bear. Instead, I told her stories about her grandfather, about his kindness, his intelligence, and the boundless love he had for his family. Your grandpa always said that the most important thing in life is to be true to yourself, baby. I told her one afternoon as she showed me a drawing she had made. Do not ever let anyone make you feel small or tell you that you are not capable. Your heart is your compass. Always follow it. I was passing his true legacy on to her, a legacy of love, strength, and authenticity. Sitting on my balcony one evening, watching the moon create a silver path across the water, I thought about everything that had happened. My victory was not in the legal documents or the angry phone calls or the boxes of returned memories. My real victory was here in this moment. It was the quiet peace in my heart. It was the freedom to choose my own happiness. Robert had given me a choice, and I had honored his memory not by fighting for a house, but by embracing the life he had so lovingly prepared for me. My win was not revenge, it was my release, and I had finally learned the most powerful lesson of all. Sometimes the bravest act of love is not holding on, but letting go. True wealth isn't the property we leave behind, but the dignity we uphold. Sometimes the greatest act of love is not to give in, but to let go, forcing others to find their own strength by facing the consequences of their choices. Their life, their lesson. Your life, your peace.